The birth of nothing. This is what nothing looks like. In the foreground, two birds sit on a branch in a tree. A peach, perhaps. Blossoms, perhaps. In the distance, two high mountain peaks obscured by clouds. That's The Birth of Nothing by Patrick Grizzell from Landing Signals, a Sacramento anthology from 1985, almost 40 years ago.
Yeah.
And I'm Bob Stanley, and I'm here with Patrick Grizzell here at Twin Lotus Thai in Sacramento in February 2024. So welcome, Patrick.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
Yeah.
That's an old poem.
I would think so. Almost 40 years.
Yeah. Yeah.
And you were part of the Landing Signals project, I think,
Yeah.
putting it together.
Yeah. Well, it was the brainstorm of B.L. Kennedy. And in those days, nobody really wanted to have anything to do with B.L. because he was a wild card, right? But he came up with this good idea. And I talked to the board of the Poetry Center and said, we need to do this because it was a great idea. And it turned out to be a great book and kind of a groundbreaking book. Not kind of, it was. It was the first major collection of Sacramento poets in one place.
Yeah.
And with including, historical figures like Harold Johnson and Stella Worley and people like that are in it who had already been publishing in Sacramento, in the 60s.
So William Everson was in there.
Yes. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. A Sacramento boy. Carver, I think. Isn't Carver in there too?
Raymond Carver's in there too.
Yeah.
And looking at it today, and I was kind of like pulling at the heartstrings because I'm saying, oh, this person's not around anymore,
Right.
and this person's not around anymore. So luckily, many of the fine poets are still around and still doing stuff.
Yeah. Well, I like it as a document, especially for those people who aren't with us.
Yeah, exactly.
Because there's nice little bios of them in it, and it's a good thing. And we got a day out of it. We got our own day because of this Sacramento Poetry Day.
October 18th?
26th.
26th, okay.
Which, was named by then Mayor Ann Rudin, who was a great friend and friend of the arts in Sacramento. And, because this was kind of a groundbreaking project, she thought it should be recognized. And October 26th was the day that we had the official release. So that was the day that she named in perpetuity,
So next year will be the 40th anniversary.
Yeah.
And last year there was didn't Andrew Defy have a huge event?
Yeah. So Andrew, just past October was a second one for him. He found out about it because I was putting together for the Poetry Center an event. You were there. And we invited current and previous poets laureate, whoever could make it, to be a part of that. And when I was talking to him about it, and he says, wait, Sacramento has a poetry day? What's that all about? So he liked the idea, and since, it's been sitting dormant, really. It's a great little lapel pin and
that we have
laurel.
A poetry day in this
town. That we have it, but we haven't really done much to celebrate it, and he decided that he was going to change that.
So you got the library galleria and had 300 people in there.
Yeah, it was packed. And the previous year the same. So I think next year will probably be even bigger. He's been kind of doing the role of that event has just been to recognize people in the community who have contributed.
Yeah.
So I don't know what it'll be next time, but it'll be something different. And he likes to do it big.
He did it big. I saw billboards on the freeway.
Yeah.
It's like,
it's
just
really
the word
working.
poetry on a billboard.
Yeah.
It's like my heart was pounding.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That was pretty cool.
Yeah, he's definitely an advocate, and he's got his personal, I don't want to say agendas, his personal activist interests.
Right.
Definitely spoken word guy, really, really reaches out to the spoken word community and to other literary communities or poetry communities to try to bring people together and, kind of repair some wedges, which are I think we're getting to a point now.
Perceived wedges.
Perceived
sometimes.
wedges.
Yeah.
But I think there's a little bit of some of it. I think comes down to just genre preference. Lawrence and I were talking earlier about that. How instead of just saying I have a preference for this or that, often you add because that's garbage.
Oh.
It's no good.
Yeah.
Rather than saying it's not my cup of tea.
Yeah.
Which I think is the right way to go. Because
We can agree to disagree.
Yeah. And there's some amazing spoken word poets out there.
Yeah.
It's a different thing than I come from, but I love it too.
I always kind of thought you came to some degree from maybe the beatnik
Yeah,
world.
for sure.
I always kind of feel Gary Snyder in your work. I don't know why.
Yeah. Well, there's a reason for that. I think my first real excitement in looking at things I was reading from a standpoint of being a writer or wanting to be a writer, probably more accurately at that age, was the Beats. I connected with that work in a really big way. And, so many of the poets from that generation were active and around rather than being some historical reference, from 50 years before you were born or something. They were still walking around and doing things. And, seeing Gary Snyder for the first time was a big moment for me. Can I tell you how we actually met? Because it's a little off color.
Okay. Uh-oh.
It's not bad. It's just kind
We
of
might
funny.
get more hits that way.
Yeah. Well, I went to see him at Freeborn Hall with a bunch of other people, and I had never seen him before. And I went into the bathroom and, just doing the urinal thing, and I look up and over, and Gary Snyder had the same need at the same time. So we just kind of looked at each other and gave the upward nod like guys do when they're standing in the urinal together. And that was it. That's how my first encounter with him. Yeah. Yeah. And then, I was lucky enough to have a lot of interaction with him, interviewed him a couple of times, just spent some time hanging out
In
with him.
Poet News, I remember reading that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Luke and I went up and did one interview with him, which was really... It was fun. It was enlightening. It was a while ago. Late 80s, early 90s sometime, I think like that. I think I'm going to try to reach out to him again and see if he might be down for doing something.
I tried about 6-7 years ago,
Yeah.
and his personal assistant said he doesn't. But you never know.
Yeah.
I remember when he came when Poetry Center was at the ballet. Mm-hmm. And Luke brought him, and he brought his band with the didgeridoo and the drums, and they did Mountains and Rivers Without End, and it was about an hour and 15 minutes. It was spectacular. It was just like the music and the poetry flowed. It was really, really great.
Yeah.
So
we did another one with him there, that same space. I remember getting scolded because the PA was too loud. I was doing music.
Oh.
And it was blaring in his ear, apparently. But yeah, I like him a lot.
Yeah.
And he has also been a great resource for other people that I may have come across them, but not as quickly. For instance, Robinson Jeffers became really significant to me as a writer, and that's directly from Snyder. A mention of Jeffers in Snyder's work, and I had to look him up, and then I went, holy cow, this guy's something.
The lineage of California poets right there.
Yeah. And then that sense of being in your space, of being grounded in your space, knowing your world. I got a note from poet Jim Normington recently, and in it he said something really funny about walking around with Snyder after some writers' conference or something, and Gary was just asking him to identify the plants and flowers as they were walking through this field instead of having some lofty conversation. Do you know what that one is?
He wanted the names.
He wanted the names, yeah. He really pays attention to his world and to the world, but his world in particular. Have you been up to his place?
No.
Oh, it's amazing.
I
Amazing.
bet.
A lot of poets had a hand in building that too. All of the great Carpenter poets of Nevada City, like Will Staple and Doc Dockler.
Okay, I know Will.
People like that
built
that place with him. So
that would have been a good time to be up there.
Yeah,
I think wasn't Rebecca Morrison involved up there for a while? I haven't heard from her for a long time.
Yeah, she's living in France now.
Yeah. So your roots, so Snyder and Jeffers, and then somewhere along the line you took classes with Dennis Schmitz, right? He was a big influence.
Dennis definitely was a big influence, as was Catherine Holvine. Big influence. My teachers at Sac State really made a difference in, I think, taking reading seriously, reading more, reading with a real intention to learn rather than be entertained, which certainly fits in there. Gene Redmond was one of my professors then, who brought, as you know, both Quincy Troop and Maya Angelou to Sac State for a semester. And I got to study playwriting with Maya Angelou.
Wow.
Which was phenomenal. She was a serious person.
Really?
At least in the student-teacher role, she was very stern.
Stern, okay.
Yeah, there's no calling her Maya or anything like that.
No Maya.
She made it clear from day one, you will call me Miss Angelou and I will call you Mr. Grizzell. That's it.
you pushed that button and it didn't,
That's right.
It didn't go up the elevator.
Yeah. The cool thing is that later we got beyond that. The relationship lasted. We brought her back some years after that to do a performance here at the Crest Theater. Really wonderful. And, it was a great thing. One thing that we learned is when you're that big, your assistant is really kind of hell to work with.
Yeah.
Demanding and meticulous and everything is just so, and But you learn to say, well, yes, of course.
Of course. Yes.
Of course I'll do that. Again.
When we had Juan Felipe Herrera at the Crest, maybe 2016, 17, something like that, the agent, we had to have a limo pick him up in Fresno. And there were all these little certain things. And then when he got here, was the limo okay? I don't know. I don't need a limo. I mean, he was just like, he was the most relaxed, easygoing, easy. But the company that represented him was very demanding. So it was kind of an interesting mix there.
Yeah. Someone mentioned to me, regarding Maya Angelou at that point, basically said, I bet she has no idea that this person is like this. And maybe not. I don't know. She was a great gatekeeper. I can give her that.
Yeah. But you brought a lot of people. I mean, one thing I want to talk about is you as a connector of poets, because you talked about Andrew Defy, who's, trying to connect people and get as many people involved in poetry. You've been doing that also for many years.
Yeah.
How that started and why and how does that work for you?
I took some time off, like 20 years, from that whole organizing thing. It's an interesting lead up to my involvement with the Poetry Center. I wasn't aware of it for its inception, actually. I had been wanting to start a literary magazine, and I'd been writing to people, and I was aiming high. Like I wrote to Snyder, I wrote to Ferlinghetti, I gathered up a few pieces from local poets that I knew. And there was a little bit of a kind of a funny reckoning moment for me that said to me, you need to take yourself seriously if you're going to do this. So the first one was I had asked specifically from Ferlinghetti for his poem Populist Manifesto. I get a little postcard in the mail. City Lights Books, one of the famous pictures on the card. And it just says, okay to use Populist Manifesto, non-commercially, L. Ferlinghetti. That was it. And I thought, cool, great. A couple days later, my phone rings. Hello? This is Lawrence Ferlinghetti. And I'm like, it is not. I thought someone was pulling my leg, right? because I'm sure I was bragging about the postcard. But it was him, and he said he was wanting to make sure that I was legit and what was I going to do and when was I going to publish this thing and all of that stuff. So I get off the phone, with this happening because I'm a kid still, right? And that's why I thought, boy, I really need to be serious about this. If I'm going to ask somebody like that for something and they're going to take the time to call me, I can't be monkeying around. But the unfortunate truth is I never published the magazine. It was a big undertaking, and I wasn't prepared to do it. I just didn't even know what I was doing at that point. Later, he thought the story was funny. Of course, he didn't remember it. He gets so many requests for things, but and he said, "Did you know? So you never published them?" He said, "No," and I think I said something like, "So does that mean I can still publish the poem?" Gary, interestingly, since Ferlinghetti is his own publisher, right? Snyder wrote back and said, I don't know if you can use it. You have to ask New Directions. Yeah. So that was a different experience. So around that same time, I started hearing about this poetry thing, right? Looked it up, saw an interview. I think it might have been in whatever the early version of the News and Review was, an interview with Teresa. And she was talking about it, and I read it, and I thought, boy, I should get in touch with them. And I did. Catherine was already on the board, one of the early board members. So it started in July of 79, and I joined the board in November of 79.
Okay, yeah. Pretty
close to the beginning. And, I was there for 20 years in different roles.
Mary used to talk about how you and she would do Poet News like for hours and hours and back and forth writing articles. And
sure.
I mean, it was probably, I've seen 16, 20, maybe 24 pages, almost like what you're doing now online.
Right. Now is easier.
I would think so. You don't have to print it.
Right.
Yeah.
And it's all digital, and, you can just throw stuff up. In those days, it was all hot wax rollers and cutting things out and big, blue line boards that you had to paste everything onto. And you
did it every month.
All by hand. Yeah.
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 And then you were doing interviews. I mean, you have William Stafford, and you mentioned Maya Angelou, Snyder. I mean, Phil Levine. I mean, you had so many great poets.
Yeah. Mary did a lot of really interesting interviews. She interviewed Stafford on his translations from Urdu, which was a fascinating article. Stafford is, another now for me in that sort of pantheon of really important influences, and not so much in writing style, but in how he sees the world. I always feel that the most important thing that a poet, one of the important things, not the most, one of the important things that a poet contributes is how to view the world. Whatever your topic is, or whatever your political position is, it's about seeing the world as it is from your perspective, soaking in as much of that. Stafford does that really well and ties it into really important decision-making. Like the poem, forget the title now, but where he finds the injured doe traveling in the dark. Yeah. And talks about this. The whole poem, I think, is him working through his decision to eventually push the pregnant, still living doe off the cliff because there's nothing he could do except leave her otherwise to just die there. That's about a very specific viewpoint and a way of life. Snyder does the same. But I also like the crazy stuff too. I mean, this kind of goes back to the beat stuff. I loved Kerouac because he was so wild. I think a lot of those poets were young and nuts, and a lot of them were like Snyder, who was part of that, but he still says that he really wasn't part. He acknowledges something that's, I think, really important and speaks to his character. He said, one of the things I can say for sure about my relationship with Jack Kerouac is that if I didn't have it, no one would have ever heard of me. I would have been another writer out there doing something. But, because, that's not why he was Kerouac's friend, but that was a pretty significant benefit of being Kerouac's friend and having him feature you in one of his novels. And suddenly people are going, so who is this Jaffe writer guy? Because, I think people caught on pretty quick that Kerouac's characters in his books were real people that, he gave pseudonyms to and all of that. So, yeah. I don't know what I was talking about anymore.
I can't remember either. Well, I looked up the William Stafford poem.
Oh, okay.
I don't know. You want to read it or you want me to read it?
Read it.
So this is William Stafford, Traveling Through the Dark. Traveling through the dark, I found a deer dead on the edge of the Wilson River Road. It is usually best to roll them into the canyon. The road is narrow. To swerve might make more dead. By glow of the taillight, I stumbled back of the car and stood by the heap, a doe, a recent killing. She had stiffened already, almost cold. I dragged her off. She was large in the belly. My fingers touching her side brought me the reason. Her side was warm. Her fawn lay there waiting, alive, still, never to be born. Beside that mountain road, I hesitated. The car aimed ahead its lowered parking lights. Under the hood purred the steady engine. I stood in the glare of the warm exhaust, turning red. Around our group, I could hear the wilderness listen. I thought hard for us all, my only swerving, then pushed her over the edge into the river.
Is that great?
Yeah. Traveling through the dark and staying in the dark.
Yeah. I have a little Stafford anecdote. So one year, forget what year, 90s sometimes, I was at the Los Angeles Times Book Festival. And I saw Stafford, who was at, I forget which table he was, the publisher table. And, very quiet, not many people at the table. So we talked for a few minutes, and we saw this big crowd of people. And so we thought, what's that? And we walked to it, and it was Muhammad Ali signing his autobiography.
Right.
And, we were like kind of chuckling about, somebody like him selling books versus someone like Stafford selling books. And I remember he said, I don't think we ever had anything that even resembled a line. It was more like the occasional gathering of the faithful. It's pretty funny. He's such a humble guy,
Was he from Oregon?
Yes.
Yeah.
And then I realized later that, and I wrote a poem about this, the parallels between him and Ali. They share a birthday, years apart, but they share a birthday. They were both conscientious objectors. Ali, Vietnam, and Stafford went through a hard time as a CO during World War II. He could have gone to jail, but he relied on his Quaker upbringing, which he believed in, and refused to fight, and ended up being part of the conservation, working on conservation corps camp, working in forest camps and putting out fires and all of that kind
Almost
of stuff.
like Snyder.
Yeah.
That's cool. I didn't know that much about him.
Yeah.
So you did a ton of stuff getting the Poetry Center going. You did Poet News, and then you went to New York for 20 years. So what is it? So I've been wondering,
went to New York for 2 weeks. Went to the East Coast for about 5 years.
5 years, okay.
Yeah. Starting in Virginia and then Washington, D.C. It was all part of a plan that was masterminded by Catherine Holbein, who was intending to go live in New York. And so Laura and I and, I guess it was the three of us pretty much made a pilgrimage at about the same time. Catherine lived in the city, And I, because I was there for work, I went to work for Crown Books. So I lived in Virginia, which was weird. It's really being back in the deep South, which is where I'm from. The neighborhood where I was definitely a place where people thought the South was going to rise again.
Okay.
One of my neighbors, older man, we went over for dinner once, and at a break in dinner when the women were in the kitchen, where they're supposed to be, he says, "So you're from Alabama?" I said, "Yes, sir." And he said, "So reckon you got a Confederate flag hid in the attic too?" This is who they were. And I said, "Well, actually, no, I don't." And he was a man in his 80s, so I didn't want to take him on and be rude or anything. I just let it go. And then my other neighbor on the other side, same way.
Wow.
And this is, mind you, 5 miles outside of Washington, D.C.
So it's like Alexandria or
Yeah,
something?
Alexandria, yeah.
It's not like
Yeah.
you're out in the country.
No. Pretty nuts.
Yeah.
Pretty nuts. Yeah, so, and then I moved into the city of D.C., which was amazing. I lived about 2 miles from the Watergate, which was this iconic thing from my youth with Nixon and all of that. And it was where I shopped and had my shirts pressed,
Any poetry when you were back east?
Yes. Yeah. Went to some really good readings in Washington. I was there for the inaugural, the official inaugural poet laureate reading for Stanley Kunitz.
Oh, wow.
He was 95 at the time.
Yeah.
He'd been laureate before it became the poet laureate.
So Catherine can still run for poet laureate.
She can.
Yeah.
She can be it. Yeah.
That was
and it was
the
amazing.
second time.
Yeah.
For Kunitz, yeah.
Yeah. It took him forever to get up the aisle, and this is the gravitas of the thing was stunning. He needed help getting up to the podium, and bent over, and for every inch, just an old guy. And then he started to speak. Different story. He read poems of his that spanned the entire century, from 1905 to then. Phenomenal.
Wow.
Phenomenal. And the room was filled with poets, and it's a great thing to be. It was in the Library of Congress.
Oh, nice.
Yeah. And then I took a long walk home after the reading. Another of my, if heroes is the right word, it probably is, in poetry, of course, Walt Whitman. And I lived in a place that, looking at his travels in D.C. when he was there, before and during the Civil War.
When he was a nurse?
Yes.
Yeah.
And just traveling around, there was a book that came out called The Better Angels. And in it, I had just made notes in the blank first page of his travels around Washington. And, I'm like, I'll be damned. He probably walked by, definitely my street, probably the house, which was Civil War era, but had been damaged and then rebuilt during Reconstruction, 1870s. But I gave myself a little tour based on his travels to buildings that were still there, but were other things. Okay. So like the old armory, which was then, whatever it was, wine stocks or something, right. But all of that stuff was still there. Just the history of the place is phenomenal. Yeah. And the Kennedy Center was right down the street too. And they did great concerts every Sunday for free with really, like significant people there.
So culturally, that's great being in D.C.
Yeah.
I remember you did a Whitman reading here at the park across from the Crocker, probably 20 years ago.
Yeah.
That was a great event. I mean, and it was all of Leaves of Grass. It was the whole 55 sections or whatever it is. That was really fun.
Well,
for his birthday.
Huh?
You did it on his birthday, right?
Probably.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's not really a private event, but there is a reading that I do either on his birthday or on his death day at the old city cemetery. And we meet among the Civil War graves where the Union Monument there is. And they're all Civil War graves. And we just meet there. And I borrow from, once again, Catherine Holbein, her admonition in reading Homer, which is nobody speaks but the poet. So it's not for you to read your poem about Walt Whitman or a lecture about Walt Whitman. We read Walt Whitman and that's it. When we're done, we're done. And so one of the things I found, I like that cemetery. I've been going there for years. It's a place that I like to go and walk and think and work stuff out sometimes, just sit. Stumbling around near the Union graves, Union soldier, veteran graves, I found the graves of slaves. A big plot of, the man's name was Nathan Ray. He was a slave in the South. Somehow, I think he was freed by his owner. His owner had willed that when he died that Nathan Ray would have his freedom, but only him, right? And he had a family, he had children. He came to California for the gold rush. So this was early on, right?
Yeah.
Way before the Civil War. He came to California, made some money, bought a little piece of property, had something for himself. And then he went back with money, purchased his wife out of slavery, brought her to California. They had no idea where their children were. One of the statements on the plaque on the grave refers to the horrors of the child slave trade. So just common practice that if you had a child, that child may or may not stay with you. When they were old enough, they might be sold off to someone somewhere else and you won't ever see them again. He managed to find all of his children, bought them out of slavery. Many of them lived and died in Sacramento, and his family still flourishes. They're all educators and scholars now.
Yeah.
So my thinking now is the next Whitman reading will be at that gravesite. One of the beefs on Whitman, and I've, it's always been the one problem that I have with Whitman, which is he was not very good on abolition. Not that he wasn't good on it. He didn't want to do it. He did think that black people were inferior. He didn't dislike them. He hated slavery. He thought it was an evil that should go away, but he refused to take an official position, kind of echoing Lincoln. His argument was, I agree with it in principle, but if we do that, it will destroy the country. Right? If we take on this slavery as an issue, it will destroy the country. He wasn't wrong. Lincoln had to do it to get it, the thing actually happening. But, I'm thinking this is a smart guy.
Yeah.
He's got people like Thoreau and Emerson and Horace Greeley pulling his sleeve and saying, Walt, you really need to join the abolitionists. And he refused to do it. So, that's given him a big black eye in history, and deserved. Yeah. You think he would have figured it out. So with that in mind, I think, maybe either in May or, March is pretty quick. March 26th, I think, is his birthday, right? But when we do that reading again, it'll be there. With that in mind, as a sort of little tip of the hat to the only weakness, really, it's the only weakness I see in Whitman was that he was not strong enough to stand up to that. Yeah. And he needed to. And he had such a big voice, a big platform, that it would have made a difference, And he had Lincoln's ear, too,
I didn't know that.
Yeah. In fact, there's a funny thing during the war. He was invited to meet with Lincoln, and he refused to do it. Broke his own heart, because he would have wanted nothing more than to meet at the White House with Abraham Lincoln. But he says, he's busy. He's got other things to do, better things to do than talk to some old poet, And
then he wrote the poem for Lincoln later.
Yeah. There is a great something Playhouse. It was a series of filmed plays, basically, I think they were on public television, something Playhouse. And there was one about Lincoln, and Lincoln is played by Rip Torn.
Okay.
And he does an incredible job as Lincoln in this thing. But one of the poignant scenes in it is, I don't know exactly when it is, probably the war is on. Lincoln is coming by in his carriage, and Whitman is in the crowd, and he steps forward to see him. And I don't know if this actually happened. I hope it did. But Lincoln looks at him, tips his stovepipe hat, and goes on. And, and Whitman's elated.
A moment for the poet.
That's right. Yeah, that's all he got.
Well, so I've got a little surprise for you.
Oh my God! Look at that.
This is a book you wrote in 1986 called Dark Music, edited and with an introduction by D.R. Wagner.
Yeah. I have one of those.
And then I have Luke Bright's Messages. I don't know. Do you have both of these?
Yeah.
You do. I kind of figured. I don't know if you wanted them. I was at a.
No, I don't.
I was at a. So I was.
These are rare. I'd love to have it if you don't want.
Yeah, those are for you.
Oh, well, thank you.
So I was at a friend of mine. A friend of a friend passed away, and they said, this guy, and his name was David Harper in Citrus Heights. He had a big poetry collection.
Oh.
And so I was invited, and a couple of us went over. I think Stan went with us, and we went, and he had maybe 300 or 400 books of poetry. Great, well curated collection. And
wow.
Your book was there.
Wow.
And Luke's book was there. And throughout and I took, I don't know, 10 or 15 or 20. I took too many that I don't have any room for them.
Right.
But he had written, I mean, he's marked which poems he liked, and he writes little comments, and he evidently wrote poetry.
Wow. David Harper,
and we've asked a bunch of people, and Mary didn't know who he was, and I think he just was, he loved poetry. He studied poetry, he wrote poetry, but he never connected. He just sat there, and his cat was there. The story, I mean, we never met him. We just, after he passed away.
Wow.
So your book came from there.
Is there notes in it?
There's all kinds of little notes and X's and O's, and we don't really know what the stuff means. But
I hope it means he likes them.
I think he did. No,
There's
I think
a lot of notes.
The X's, yeah. No, I mean, yeah. I know it's kind of cool knowing. I mean, I wish he had bought one of my books.
Oh boy.
So I don't know if there's anything in there that you'd want to read.
Oh my God.
It'd be fun. I mean, we've only got a few more minutes. It'd be good to hear something from that.
It's really funny. What? Okay. So I signed this to someone named Carrie. I think I know who that is. So she may know who David Harper is. Maybe.
Okay.
I'll ask her.
40 years.
Yeah. It's falling apart, this book. This is kind of funny. I remember someone saying to me, it was John Allen Cann, said, "Oh, you mean the book with all of the introductions?" Because there's like a preface, an introduction, and a forward, which is like way too much for a first book. There should have been nothing.
Those are all 3 words. There aren't any more words.
That's right. Yeah. Well, DR wrote a thing, I wrote a thing, and then Luke insisted that he should write a much more personal statement for it. So that's how it got all of these extra things. And it begins with the birth of nothing.
Oh, I didn't even know that was in there.
Yeah. So that I consider that really my first poem that I can call a poem. It's from the 70s, early 70s. Yeah.
You were like 8 years old at the time?
Yes. Yeah. I'm going to read this one. I'm reading this one for D.R. Wagner. It's a poem that's dedicated to him. It's called Programming the Loom. That's a reference to his Petty Point pieces. Yeah, that, and we were talking about how it would be to mass produce those things. And he used the phrase, well, you'd have to program the loom. And I'm like, oh, I like that. And just that phrase stuck. So programming the loom. I haven't looked at this poem in a very long time. It may suck. I don't know. Programming the loom for D.R. Wagner. Everywhere I look tonight, I see the word dream. Between the lines in the daily news, between the cat's claws, in the light breaking through the bottom of my glass of brandy, the word dream. The word dream begins to speak to me. I hear it like fur moving on a frightened animal, a scream caught in a sheet of glass, air moving around a stag's foot, or a thread falling like the curve of a woman's spine. There's something frightening about it. The scream, like migrating black stars, breaks from the glass, lighting in a field of blood. Sensual terror. Chinese girls with faces painted like porcelain carrying throwing stars in their brassieres. You program the loom, and the dream eats at you, gnawing the way silence gnaws at the root of night, silence all around, and within the silence, darkness. There are beasts waiting at every turn, beasts dressed in satin slips and high-heeled red shoes. It's not easy. Sometimes at night, you wake up and swear you hear the sound of glass breaking, a scream in the laughter of a woman with a cat's face who looks out from the closet. You try to get back to sleep and cannot. There's too much you need to know. You need to know a lot in that situation, I think. Yeah.
Wow.
So for, DR, who, as you know, passed away recently. And so I've been thinking about him and about the making of this book. When we were working on it, his wife was pregnant with the twin daughters. And she was big as a house and bedbound on doctor's orders. So DR and they had this giant bed in their old house there. And we would spread the manuscript all over and, work on the bed so that she wouldn't have to be stuck up there by herself because she was way upstairs in this old house in Oak Park. And, it was a lot of fun. And now, connection with the girls has been important for me and for them, just trying to help them sort things out and all of that. I've been connected with them since they were in the womb,
I remember the first time I heard him read, he was just so wildly imaginative. There was just kind of this freedom in his ideas, just really great.
Yeah, no boundaries with that guy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, Patrick, this has really been fun. Obviously, we could go on for hours, but, the place is going to close.
I got nothing to do. Well, thank you so much.
Thank you. Yeah. So I'm Bob Stanley here with Pat Grizzell, and this is Lawrence Dinkins' Coffee and Poets. Mm-hmm. And if you're interested, there's a lot of Coffee and Poets podcasts on the NSAA, that's NSAA 360 YouTube channel. NSAA 360. Susan Kelly DeWitt's there. Mary Zeppa's there. Catherine Holbein is there. And different interviewers and different poets. And I think there's going to be a lot more. We're excited about doing this. So
this is great. Thanks. Yeah.
Well, thanks for joining me. It's fun. I just have more questions, but maybe we'll pick it up later on over a beer.
Why not? Okay.
Okay. Thank you,
Bob.